Jumpstart Your Joy is a podcast that looks at the inspiration, intention, and action that you could take in your everyday to bring more joy into your life. This is Paula Jenkins. Let's get on to the show. Welcome to Jumpstart Your Joy and the first episode of Season 8. I know it's been a little while, and I'm really excited to be back here with all of you. There's been so much time and lots of changes and lots of time to think, so I'd love to dive in to all of it with you and talk about where we're headed next, because I'm pretty excited about the future. Before we get to the show, of course, I want to give you all a very warm welcome. And if you want to find out more about Jumpstart Your Joy, you can head over to the website at jumpstartyourjoy.com. You can find the show notes for this episode, along with links to the things that I'm talking about. And you'll also find a brand new section about labyrinth walks, so be sure and check that out as well. So it's been about 1.5 years since I've taken to the microphone, and that is a very long break, given that I started the show back in 2015 and had never taken a break of any duration in the first 50 episodes that I did. It really was a long break and a good one, and I think it's also something that embodies a lot of what I'm going to begin to talk about now as this show moves forward. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about being intentional with your time, being intentional with the people and causes you associate with, and really giving yourself the time and space to think about what it is that you need, what brings you back to center. How do you get back to that place when things feel difficult or hard or overwhelming? Like I said, I've never taken a break from this show. And so it's strange and awkward and even kind of feels a little funny to sit down and record an episode again. But back in January of 2023, my dad passed away after being fairly sick. And after that happened, I realized that there was just no way that I could juggle everything. Being someone that has a professional career as a podcast producer for another show, and being a mom and being a wife and being in support of my own mom. All of those things were important and needed to keep moving forward. And so those are the things that I stuck with. And I intentionally, after season 7 had wrapped and the last episode went up in December, I was like, okay, I'm on a break. It wasn't really something I talked about. Obviously, there was not another episode, but it was a break that was very intentional. And it was hard to do because I had never done that in any way since 2015. I would run reruns if I wanted to take a little breather. But I know that hustle culture really weighed into why I wouldn't have taken a break. And as did what my identity has been, which is that of a podcast producer, that of a podcaster. So when I'm thinking about how my life and things that bring me joy, I mean, I love the show. That's absolutely true. And I'm back and I'm excited about it. But thinking about that hustle culture of having to stay with something, but also when your identity is tied to something, have it be something that you feel you must keep doing. And it reminds me of what I would consider both a good and a dangerous quote, which is, if you're not growing, you're dying. And I kind of was thinking about that as I was coming up with this first episode of season 8. And when you think about that, there's a double side to that quote, if you're not growing, you're dying, because it makes me ask, well, what is growth? And I think a lot of hustle culture will tell us, well, growth is meaning playing big and getting bigger and accumulating numbers and getting more followers and more sponsorships and more likes. And sure, that's a form of growth, and that's outward growth. But when I think about growth, at least in the last 18 months-ish, it has been about an internal growth and leaving myself time to think and be, and honestly just be quiet and see what happens. Raises that question around the hustle culture and messaging that we so often get about what growth actually is. Because when I think about that quote, it really does, at least at first, bring to mind the ways that we are told that we have to keep moving and growing and getting bigger in order to be worthy or to be considered important in some way, which is so strange and outdated, at least in my mind now after the last 18 months. Because to me, the growth and the life that I found inside of that was choosing to honor choices that I was making about how my time was spent. And as I said, that all needed to be focused on things that weren't necessarily outwardly obvious to anybody else. If we move in then to also being very intentional about connections and the people and causes that one would associate with. I also think about something that my friend Father Rusty told me back when my father had passed away, and that was that grief will really throw you for a loop. And he's an amazing human, and I really do respect him. He's actually since left his own post at the retreat center that I'm still a part of and where I do labyrinth work at to go take care of his brother and sister. And so he's taking that time and honoring even the same thing that I was talking about with knowing that you need to be intentional with your time. We only have so much time here. And I like that he is modeling that for other people and saying, no, I need to step away from this vocation to go do something else. And I think that's brave and courageous and very powerful. But looping back to grief, I think that most people, unless they have lost someone very close to them, don't really understand the depth that grief can have in your life. And it's very difficult to put into words. And it's not something I'm going to be eloquent at, but I think it is difficult to understand until you're in the midst of it. And you're like, whoa, this truly is the strangest of things. And it also led me to really realize that there are parts of people's lives that most people from the outside will never be able to understand. And so what that looked like for me is trying to live and also process things is, I'm doing my best every day. Some days have been and will be and always will be really messy. We're going to make mistakes, and learning to live with that is also part of this work. And I also see that during this time, of our society, there's so many causes and so many very truthfully important things that are coming up. And I know that there is definitely part of me that wants to stand up for all of them because I feel deeply when people's rights are being questioned or taken away or taken for granted. And I also have to think back to the conversation that I had with Sonia Renee Taylor, which I can point to, but where I asked her, how do you do this activist work and also have the bandwidth for it? And she said, I only give from my overflow. And this was really formative and important to me, especially during the last 18 months, is grief takes a lot of time and energy and leaves you with very little overflow. You're already overwhelmed and beyond what you can actually balance or do. And seeing places like at my son's school, there was a flag ban. And so, yes, I am against banning flags. That doesn't sit right with me. But I also recognize there's only so much I can give to this. And I found myself having to be vocal for what I stood for, but also honor. I don't have overflow right now. I don't have any extra to give. And so there's only so much that I can be involved in here and do so in a way that's honoring where I am at this phase in my life. And it reminds me of spoon theory, which is usually something people associate with chronic illness, where you think of having a set number of spoons during the day. And each thing that's difficult or takes your energy is like taking one spoon away from that pile of spoons. And so at the end of the day, you might have extra spoons because you've rested and you've honored your mental health and all of that. But other days you might notice it's been difficult and you don't have any spoons left. And that's when you need to rest. So I think it's important, especially in grief and probably in the rest of life right now, we're met with so many causes and so many important things that need our attention that we tap into knowing I can only do this if I'm giving from overflow, and I only have so much energy that I can spend on things in any given day. And I think it's important to communicate that to people around you, or just allow yourself to be quiet and still and not feel like you have to respond to people if they're asking, oh, can you give more? Can you get more involved? It's okay to say no. It's also okay to state a boundary. And I think as we talk about boundary work, Nedra Tawwab is excellent at this, and I can link up her book in the show notes. It's very important when you start to talk about boundary work that when you're stating a boundary, it should be something that it can be concise and it should be said kindly and clearly. That's how that communication is probably best received by someone else. Boundary work, I feel like I need to say, is not an invitation for anyone to be a jerk. Because really the heart of it, if we're working on this and we're trying to dive into the interior here of our own hearts, is we're talking about self-kindness, and boundaries are about self-kindness. It's also talking about how can I kindly communicate to other people that maybe I don't have overflow and that I've done as much as I can. Because there's definitely been a couple of times when people around me haven't honored that when I've said, no, I can't be involved. And I've even had one specific one where someone was highly critical of me and told me my head was in the sand and I didn't know what I was doing. And, that I'll have to admit that stung because it didn't recognize where I was at or that I was trying to just say no. And I'm saying this in case you're in the midst of grief or you're in the midst of overwhelm or life is just getting really hard, is I think it's fine if you experience any of this to recognize that it's probably more about that person and their perfectionism that they hold themselves accountable to. Like they probably wouldn't feel good about saying no for their own selves about something. Because most people are very uncomfortable when someone else sets a boundary, especially if they themselves have very loose or wiggly boundaries. I can remember a time when this even was so true for me and that I've grown from, which was, back in the day I was at an ad agency and somebody that I'd known before, his name was Sam. He had applied for a job and joined us, but he had a very long commute and the hours were very long where we were at. And he basically told me, I can't do this anymore. I can't stay late. I have to get home. And I remember at the time being so frustrated because I was like, well, but this is just how we work. This is just what we do here. And it was like kind of inconceivable to who I was at the time that someone would be stating a boundary that didn't match what we did as work. And I could see now, and even kind of at the time, that my discomfort with Sam stating a boundary was because I couldn't state the same boundary. Like I wasn't able to. I was afraid of saying that, or I felt like it would reflect poorly on me if I did it. And so in the end, it's more of an admiration for Sam to be able to say, well, this is my boundary and I'm sticking to it. Not everybody understands from the outside what may be going on for us on the inside. And so I've also seen in the last year and a half where I need to consider that if a friend or an acquaintance is continuing to interact with me in a way that seems unkind or they can't accept that I'm setting a boundary, that's really difficult because it's important that all of us realize that there are things going on behind the scenes for every person and that we meet each other in this place of graciousness. Because the other thing that I've seen, especially at my son's school, there's sides that have been taken over this flag ban issue. So then we start getting into areas where people are calling each other liberals and conservatives. And really the stakes have been raised at this point by both sides that it's just everyone talking in cancel culture ways about the other side. And it doesn't give either side the graciousness to step into the middle and say, let's have a conversation. It doesn't give anyone the room to step back from a position and try and make it right. Neither side is giving the other side the graciousness with which to say, let's find the middle ground. And I think that has to be the first step in so many of these situations. There's a great book by Amanda Riley, which is all about high conflict. And if you haven't read it, it was eye-opening and somewhat life-changing for me because it talks about how people get into this place where they become really steeped in the conflict itself and how you find your way out of it. And I think we're all going to have to become a little bit better at that as we move forward because so many of these things in cancel culture are becoming this place where we all have to step back into a corner. And I would guess that a lot of the times people don't even remember the real reason they started disagreement or what really started this deep-seated issue. Because especially in this case with my son's school, yes, it's about a flag ban, but it's not really about a flag ban. It's about so many other things. I definitely value discussion and people who can step away from whatever an issue is and actually take the time to listen to another human and speak to that person as another human. Because what I'm seeing is humanity and society is becoming more interested in this angle of we stand against than it is on the angle of what we stand for. And I think there's a very important difference, especially when we're having conversations about joy. The vibration even of what I stand against is kind of angry and difficult and, hands on hips. And like there's a whole body language that comes from this, finger pointing, that kind. When you think about what do I stand against, there's a very different notion And even when I'm sure what I'm about to say it, then what you feel in your body when you say what I stand for. There's a sense of lightness and proudness and possibility when you start to think about the things that you stand for and that you want to bring into the world. And I think there's a lot more to say about this topic of how as a culture we got into this space where it does seem like we're retreating to our corner in the ring and getting into what am I against? I think the pandemic had so much to play with this. People really felt traumatized on all sides by this pandemic and what it meant, and if they were going to wear a mask, they weren't going to wear a mask. A lot of people are super frustrated with working. It's hard to navigate anymore, and inflation plays into this. I also think that the old order of the white, cisgendered, able-bodied male being at the top of a food chain is actively being challenged right now, and with good reason. And I think it's also going to have trickle-down effects, that this whole thing is starting to become dismantled, but then how do we talk about it in ways, and how do we get to the other side of whatever these many revolutions are, to be on a positive note and to have a society that we love and that is standing for something instead of just really entrenched in the arguments and the fighting. So all of this, this is kind of like a heavy deep dive into things, but all of these things have played into kind of my thoughts over the last 18 months and led me to several things, which I will now share, and we'll get into a lighter space here in this episode, which is I've gotten to that space of thinking of, okay, if all this is true, then what do I need? What do I need, and how can I be a person that's working in this world with all these factors and influences to feel like I'm someone who's centered and happy and joyful and could come back to a show like this and have meaningful things to say again. And some of this dovetails back with the work of Byron Katie, which if you've been here a long time, you know, and I will link up to her work in the show notes. But she talks about there's really 3 kinds of business in the world. And by business, she means things that you're paying attention to. She does not mean like capitalist business, like we're making money. And these 3 things are, there's your business, there's other people's business, and then there's God or the universe's business. And so I think it's really important to keep these things in mind, especially when we're starting to talk about all of these many disagreements, these many factions and factors that come into play, because the truth of the matter is I can really only address and deal with my own business. It is simply not my job here to be involved too much with other people's business unless they invite me in or seem to need my help or we're on a team. There's places here where I do get involved with other people's business. And then there's also stuff that's just out of my realm. It's not even something I can control. You know, the weather, you know, somebody else's salvation I can't control. And it's so helpful for me, and I would like to think for other people, to keep those things in mind. Like, I can control what is truly mine. I cannot control someone else, and I certainly cannot control the myriad of things that are well beyond my business. Kind of a side note, it feels like so many Facebook arguments are really based on other people's business or the universe's business. And frankly, no one's going to win. There's no winner. We're just shouting to shout or exchanging to exchange words. But since I can only deal with my business, I can choose to make a podcast that is also engaged with other people and topics that hopefully other people find interesting. And I can talk about the philosophical points of the universe and its business. You know, what does this maybe mean? How do I take inspiration from this? How can I apply the beautiful things that I see to my own life and the world that we share? I also think looking at focusing on your own business can also connect with your values, the capital V types of values. And it also connects to like, what do you need each day to stay joyful or feel calm? Because the reflections that I see about this is all of these things that are my business, these answers that I've been pondering, they all come from an inward place. They all have, for me, taken the time to go inward and ask myself questions, you know, maybe work with a therapist or in some sort of a situation where I have time to like unpack my thoughts and think about them and see what's happening. But it's not from an external place. I'm not getting answers about my business from someone else. Ever. Really, ever. Someone might help me and guide me and walk with me. But I'm going to be honest, like I've never gotten these answers from like a program. They just don't happen that way for me. And I think that's hard because we all have a lot of external messages all day long that are vying for our attention. It's a lot of brands, that are making promises. Of course, I was in advertising, so I know how this works. That's the point. They want you to pay attention to, and they want you to believe that whatever they're saying is true. We've got influencers. We've got programs promising to do something. And I was listening to one of my old podcast episodes about how our minds are addicted to our own thoughts. And I think this kind of taps into that, is when we're looking for external validation or external inspiration or someone other than ourselves to tell us what to do and how to do it or when to do it. It really is that. And then our brain gets obsessed and then it starts thinking about that. And the brain is running the very busy line of thinking about, is this what I need? How am I going to do this? That person had success. And I think until we quiet all that down and say, yeah, but what do I need? More the Bella Lively of the Lively Show, thinking of listen to your internal dialogue. Go inside and ask, what do I need? In other words, pay attention to your own business. And I think this also has come very true into light for me in the last 18 months as I've also become more involved with the buy nothing philosophy. Of course, I still do buy things, but now I'm a participant in my local buy nothing group. And, it feels great to give away things that I can't use anymore to someone who can. And also to have honestly gotten a lot of really great stuff that has been very useful in my life, like a new dining room table and chair set. Like, thank you. I'm so excited. It spreads gratitude. It spreads joy to be able to bring something new into my home that I didn't pay for. And yet it's mine. But that has also helped kind of strip away some of the habits or the things in my mind that I know are running the show, which in so many cases is a capitalist mentality of, I need to go buy this thing because it will bring this. No, let's go back to what is my business? How is that impacting the rest of my decisions? And what would make me happy? And what do I value? And how can that inform my life? In other words, it goes back to what do you need? And how can you learn to trust yourself in listening to what you need to get there? Or as one of my dear friends, Dr. Amy, likes to say, what is it that you want? What will it take to get what you want? And are you willing to do what it takes to get what you want? And I also want to be really clear that that is not a question of capitalist nature. It's a question of internal desires and needs nature. Another life lesson from the last little bit has been that it is so easy to get stuck. And I really do think it's our life's work to keep circling back to what matters, keep circling back to what we value, and keep circling back to what brings us joy. Because it's so easy to either get stuck or distracted by paying attention to somebody else's business or listening to an influencer tell us what we need, or a coaching program tell us what we need, but it doesn't really fit. And I say this because I think it's very easy, one, to listen to somebody else's ideas about what's important, or to try those on for size and maybe think that maybe somebody else knows better than ourselves about what we need. And I think that's almost always, it can be an inspiration, but it doesn't mean that it's always going to be true. It's about choosing your own joy, about choosing your own calm and center. And it's about your needs and honoring your own needs over letting anyone, anything, or something else drive the bus. And I think that's really hard right now because a lot of things are vying for attention. There's a lot of noise out there. And getting centered and getting clear is key to finding your way through. And circling back to what matters and what brings us joy is also about setting that intention. And of course, this gets back to even some of the original language that I would use about the show, which is finding the inspiration, intention, and action to bring more joy into your everyday. I think we have to get more intentional now than ever before because there's so much noise. And for me, this has taken a lot of different routes because, I know a lot of people would say, well, you should meditate. And meditation is nice, and it can be very difficult for me. I like a good guided meditation, and you can find some of mine at Insight Timer if you want. I have also found labyrinth work over the last year and a half. I've always loved the labyrinth since the second time I walked one in 2004. I really loved them. And I feel like part of the mystery of them, it's a walking meditation. A true labyrinth has one circuitous route to the center and back out. There are no tricks. There are no dead ends. It is not a maze. Those are two very different things. We have David Bowie and the movie Labyrinth to thank for the confusion of maze versus labyrinth. But moving back into that, labyrinths are often a really great invitation to do metaphorical work. Meaning there's a lot of things about a labyrinth walk where you can go, ooh, that's a metaphor for my life. And in even just kind of looking at what I've been saying here about what I've learned over the last 18 months is so much of what I'm talking about is this inward journey. And that's really similar to the inward journey for a labyrinth. You're always walking from the outside in to the center and then from the center back out through layers of various circuits. That's what they call the different loops. And of course, then when there's the return back out to the outside world, you're going again through twists and turns, and you're eventually getting back out to the exterior world. And I do find that very representative of what I'd like to focus on here in the show and in my life, which is recognizing that we spend so much of our lives in that exterior space. If we think about all the space outside of the labyrinth, that's the world we live in. That's where we're always wandering around. It takes time and intentionality to enter a labyrinth and to decide, I'm going to spend this time to reflect on what is important. And I'm going to make time in my day to spend thinking about this journey, to think about the time that I need, about the people I'm hanging out with, about the decisions I'm making, about looping back to joy, about looping back to what I need. And that's intentional, and it's important because it takes some time, and you got to set aside the time to do this. It also means that once you've wandered in and found your way to the center of the labyrinth, to spend some time there in the center, kind of the metaphor for the internal space within yourself, to reflect on what is your business? Where am I getting hung up? Where am I getting stuck? Where am I giving away too much energy to somebody? Where do I need to set a boundary so that I can feel like I'm in control here and I have more energy to give for myself and my family, and I can feel more joyful about this journey? And then it is an intentional return to the world that we live in, right? You do have to make the journey back through the labyrinth, step out of the labyrinth, and then you're back in the air quotes real world. And then lots of times on a labyrinth walk, I would encourage someone to write down or journal what it is that they've done or noticed during this particular journey. So there's some sort of reintegration after they've taken that time of spending some time within a labyrinth. So I realize this is a bit of a meander maybe, but I swear, but it's setting the tone. It's setting the tone for what is this show as I return. This is the labyrinth that I have walked since I've been back with you all. And what it means is that I really do want what we've talked about on this show in the past to continue to be the focus for the future. And that's always been about finding joy in hard times and difficult situations with the very intentional purpose of trying to remain focused about what I stand for. And if that resonates, what you stand for, right? So I'm minding my own business, and I'm inviting you to come along for the journey of finding joy in hard times and difficult situations. I would very much love to create more of a community around what we all collectively stand for, around the things that bring us joy, and how we can make a positive influence in the world by talking about what we want to see more of, what we want to create more of, and what we want to bring more of into the world. So that's the mission. I'm not here to stand for what I'm against. Mother Teresa famously said this: don't invite me to an anti-war rally, but if you start a peace rally, invite me to that. Paraphrase to what she said. So my plans for this season are continue the conversations about the balance of living in society during a difficult and confusing time and having those conversations with people who have lived through hard times and difficult situations, but chosen joy. Always the focus. I would love to find ways to have discussions about what people stand for and what they want to bring into the world. Like, what does this look like? We're walking this journey together. How can we reframe and rephrase conversations that maybe I'm against this into, no, I'm actually for this? And to find a place for the community to share what's good, focusing on what we want in an intentional way, and to be a force for bettering the planet and the world. And I think you'll find that some of the discussions then may lean more towards things that have to do with labyrinths, spirituality, and how those all intersect with joy, because that's been more of my path recently, and I'm doing more and more labyrinth work. So I don't have it all figured out yet. I never did. And I know there's times when this is going to be messy because I'm diving back in. I'm putting something back into my life that was not there for a little while, meaning the show. And I mean, I have to say, I really love Jumpstart Your Joy, and I adore the people I've met, and I'm so appreciative of the conversations that I've had in the last, 9 years. How is that possible? And I just want to keep going. So I really hope you'll continue to join me. If you want to find some of the links for this episode, head on over to jumpstartyourjoy.com and go to the podcast tab. They will be there also on the homepage. And if you'd like to send me an email, I would love to hear if you have a story you want to share, if there's some way you want to be involved. I would love to hear from you. My email is paula@paulajenkins.com. And over the next few weeks, I'm going to share some interviews that I had recorded prior to the break in 2023. Those are really good. I can't wait to share them. And then we'll get on to some really new stuff too. So thank you so much for tuning in. And I hope your days are filled with so much joy.